Section 81 of the Expedition of Humphry Clinker. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Deborah Lynn. The Expedition of Humphry Clinker by Tobias Smollett. Section 81. To Dr. Lewis. Dear Dick, you cannot imagine what pleasure I have in seeing your handwriting after such a long cessation on your side of our correspondence. Yet, heaven knows, I have often seen your handwriting with disgust. I mean, when it appeared in abbreviations of apothecary's Latin. I like your hint of making interest for the reversion of the collector's place for Mr. Lismahago, who is much pleased with the scheme, and presents you with his compliments and best thanks for thinking so kindly of his concerns. The man seems to mend upon further acquaintance. That harsh reserve, which formed a disagreeable husk about his character, begins to peel off in the course of our communication. I have great hopes that he and Tabby will be as happily paired as any two draught animals in the kingdom, and I make no doubt but that he will prove a valuable acquisition to our little society, in the article of conversation by the fireside in winter. Your objection to my passing this season of the year at such a distance from home would have more weight if I did not find myself perfectly at my ease where I am, and my health so much improved that I am disposed to bid defiance to gout and rheumatism. I begin to think I have put myself on the superannuated list too soon, and absurdly sought for health in the retreats of laziness. I am persuaded that all valetudinarians are too sedentary, too regular, and too cautious. We should sometimes increase the motion of the machine to unclog the wheels of life, and now and then take a plunge amidst the waves of excess, in order to case harden the constitution. I have even found a change of company as necessary as a change of air to promote a vigorous circulation of the spirits, which is the very essence and criterion of good health. Since my last, I have been performing the duties of friendship that required a great deal of exercise, from which I hope to derive some benefit. Understanding by the greatest accident in the world that Mr. Baynard's wife was dangerously ill of a pleuritic fever, I borrowed Dennison's post-chaise and went across the country to his habitation, attended only by Lloyd, quondam Clinker, on horseback. As the distance is not above 30 miles, I arrived about 4 in the afternoon, and meeting the physician at the door, was informed that his patient had just expired. I was instantly seized with a violent emotion, but it was not grief. The family being in confusion, I ran upstairs into the chamber, where indeed they were all assembled. The aunt stood wringing her hands in a kind of stupefaction of sorrow, but my friend acted all the extravagancies of affliction. He held the body in his arms, and poured forth such a lamentation, that one would have thought he had lost the most amiable consort and valuable companion upon earth. Affection may certainly exist independent of esteem. Nay, the same object may be lovely in one respect and detestable in another. The mind has a surprising faculty of accommodating, and even attaching itself in such a manner, by dint of use, to things that are in their own nature disagreeable, and even pernicious, that it cannot bear to be delivered from them without reluctance and regret. Baynard was so absorbed in his delirium, that he did not perceive me when I entered, and desired one of the women to conduct the aunt into her own chamber. At the same time I begged the tutor to withdraw the boy, who stood gaping in a corner, very little affected with the distress of the scene. These steps being taken, I waited till the first violence of my friend's transport was abated, then disengaged him gently from the melancholy object, and led him by the hand into another apartment, though he struggled so hard that I was obliged to have recourse to the assistance of his valet de chambre. In a few minutes, however, he recollected himself, and folding me in his arms, "This," cried he, "is a friendly office indeed. I know not how you come hither, but I think heaven sent you to prevent my going distracted. Oh, Matthew, I have lost my dear Harriet, my poor, gentle, tender creature, that loved me with such warmth and purity of affection, my constant companion of 20 years. She's gone for ever. Heaven and earth, where is she? Death shall not part us." So saying, he started up, and could hardly be withheld from returning to the scene we had quitted. You will perceive it would have been very absurd for me to argue with a man that talked so madly. On all such occasions the first torrent of passion must be allowed to subside gradually. I endeavoured to beguile his attention by starting little hints, and insinuating other objects of discourse imperceptibly, and being exceedingly pleased in my own mind at this event, I exerted myself with such an extraordinary flow of spirits as was attended with success. In a few hours he was calm enough to hear reason, and even to own that Heaven could not have interposed more effectually to rescue him from disgrace and ruin. That he might not, however, relapse into weaknesses for want of company, I passed the night in his chamber, in a little tent bed brought thither on purpose. And well it was I took this precaution, for he started up in bed several times, and would have played the fool if I had not been present. Next day he was in a condition to talk of business, and vested me with full authority over his household, which I began to exercise without loss of time, though not before he knew and approved of the scheme I had projected for his advantage. He would have quitted the house immediately, but this retreat I opposed. Far from encouraging a temporary disgust, which might degenerate into an habitual aversion, I resolved, if possible, to attach him more than ever to his household gods. I gave directions for the funeral to be as private as was consistent with decency. I wrote to London that an inventory and estimate might be made of the furniture and effects in his town house, and gave notice to the landlord that Mr. Baynard should quit the premises at Lady Day. I set a person at work to take account of every thing in the country house, including horses, carriages, and harness. I settled the young gentleman at a boarding school, kept by a clergyman in the neighbourhood, and thither he went without reluctance as soon as he knew that he was to be troubled no more with his tutor, whom we dismissed. The aunt continued very sullen, and never appeared at table, though Mr. Baynard paid his respects to her every day in her own chamber. There also she held conferences with the waiting women and other servants of the family; but the moment her niece was interred, she went away in a post-chaise prepared for that purpose. She did not leave the house, however, without giving Mr. Baynard to understand that the wardrobe of her niece was the perquisite of her woman. Accordingly, that worthless drab received all the clothes, laces, and linen of her deceased mistress, to the value of £500, at a moderate computation. The next step I took was to disband that legion of supernumerary domestics who had preyed so long upon the vitals of my friend; a parcel of idle drones, so intolerably insolent, that they even treated their own master with the most contemptuous neglect. They had been generally hired by his wife, according to the recommendation of her woman, and these were the only patrons to whom they paid the least deference. I had, therefore, uncommon satisfaction in clearing the house of these vermin. The woman of the deceased, and a chambermaid, a valet de chambre, a butler, a French cook, a master gardener, 2 footmen, and a coachman, I paid off, and turned out of the house immediately, paying to each a month's wages in lieu of warning. Those whom I retained consisted of the female cook, who had been assistant to the Frenchman, a housemaid, an old lackey, a postilion, and under gardener. Thus I removed at once a huge mountain of expense and care from the shoulders of my friend, who could hardly believe the evidence of his own senses, when he found himself so suddenly and so effectually relieved. His heart, however, was still subject to vibrations of tenderness, which returned at certain intervals, extorting sighs and tears, and exclamations of grief and impatience; but these fits grew every day less violent and less frequent, till at length his reason obtained a complete victory over the infirmities of his nature. Upon an accurate enquiry into the state of his affairs, I find his debts amount to £20,000, for £18,000 of which sum his estate is mortgaged; and as he pays 5 per cent. interest, and some of his farms are unoccupied, he does not receive above £200 a year clear from his lands, over and above the interest of his wife's fortune, which produced £800 annually. For lightening this heavy burthen, I devised the following expedient. His wife's jewels, together with his superfluous plate and furniture in both houses, his horses and carriages, which are already advertised to be sold by auction, will, according to the estimate, produce £2,500 in ready money, with which the debt will be immediately reduced to £18,000. I have undertaken to find him £10,000 at 4 per cent., by which means he will save £100 a year in the article of interest, and perhaps we shall be able to borrow the other £8,000 on the same terms. According to his own scheme of a country life, he says he can live comfortably for £300 a year; but, as he has a son to educate, we will allow him £500. Then there will be an accumulating fund of £700 a year, principal and interest, to pay off the encumbrance; and I think we may modestly add £300 on the presumption of new leasing, and improving the vacant farms; so that in a couple of years I suppose there will be above 1,000 a year appropriated to liquidate a debt of 16,000. We forthwith began to class and set apart the articles designed for sale, under the direction of an upholder from London, and that nobody in the house might be idle, commenced our reformation without doors as well as within. With Baynard's good leave, I ordered the gardener to turn the rivulet into its old channel, to refresh the fainting naiads, who had so long languished among mouldering roots, withered leaves, and dry pebbles. The shrubbery is condemned to extirpation, and the pleasure ground will be restored to its original use of cornfield and pasture. Orders are given for rebuilding the walls of the garden at the back of the house, and for planting clumps of firs, intermingled with beech and chestnut, at the east end, which is now quite exposed to the surly blasts that come from that quarter. All these works being actually begun, and the house and auction left to the care and management of a reputable attorney, I brought Baynard along with me in the chaise, and made him acquainted with Dennison, whose goodness of heart would not fail to engage his esteem and affection. He is indeed charmed with our society in general, and declares that he never saw the theory of true pleasure reduced to practice before. I really believe it would not be an easy task to find such a number of individuals assembled under one roof more happy than we are at present. I must tell you, however, in confidence, I suspect Tabby of tergiversation. I have been so long accustomed to that original, that I know all the caprices of her heart, and can often perceive her designs while they are yet in embryo. She attached herself to Lismahago for no other reason but that she despaired of making a more agreeable conquest. At present, if I am not much mistaken in my observation, she would gladly convert the widowhood of Baynard to her own advantage. Since he arrived, she has behaved very coldly to the captain, and strove to fasten on the other's heart with the hooks of overstrained civility. These must be the instinctive efforts of her constitution, rather than the effects of any deliberate design, for matters are carried to such a length with the lieutenant, that she could not retract with any regard to conscience or reputation. Besides, she will meet with nothing but indifference or aversion on the side of Baynard, who has too much sense to think of such a partner at any time, and too much delicacy to admit a thought of any such connection at the present juncture. Meanwhile, I have prevailed upon her to let him have 4,000 at 4% towards paying off his mortgage. Young Dennison has agreed that Liddy's fortune shall be appropriated to the same purpose, on the same terms. His father will sell out 3,000 stock for his accommodation. Farmer Bland has, at the desire of Wilson, undertaken for 2,000, and I must make an effort to advance what further will be required to take my friend out of the hands of the Philistines. He is so pleased with the improvements made on his estate, which is all cultivated like a garden, that he has entered himself as a pupil in farming to Mr. Dennison, and resolved to attach himself wholly to the practice of husbandry. Every thing is now prepared for our double wedding. The marriage articles for both couples are drawn and executed, and the ceremony only waits until the parties shall have been resident in the parish the term prescribed by law. Young Dennison betrays some symptoms of impatience, but Lismahago bears this necessary delay with the temper of a philosopher. You must know, the captain does not stand altogether on the foundation of personal merit. Besides his half pay, amounting to £42 a year, this indefatigable economist has amassed £800, which he has secured in the funds. This sum arises partly from his pays running up while he remained among the Indians, partly from what he received as a consideration for the difference between his full appointment and the half pay to which he is now restricted, and partly from the profits of a little traffic he drove in peltry during his sacumship among the Miamis. Liddy's fears and perplexities have been much assuaged by the company of one Miss Willis, who had been her intimate companion at the boarding school. Her parents had been earnestly solicited to allow her making this friendly visit on such an extraordinary occasion, and 2 days ago she arrived with her mother, who did not choose that she should come without a proper gouvernante. The young lady is very sprightly, handsome, and agreeable, and the mother a mighty good sort of a woman, so that their coming adds considerably to our enjoyment. But we shall have a third couple yoked in the matrimonial chain. Mr. Clinker Lloyd has made humble remonstrance through the canal of my nephew, setting forth the sincere love and affection mutually subsisting between him and Mrs. Winifred Jenkins, and praying my consent to their coming together for life. I would have wished that Mr. Clinker had kept out of this scrape, but as the nymph's happiness is at stake, and she has already some fits in the way of despondence, I, in order to prevent any tragical catastrophe, have given him leave to play the fool in imitation of his betters; and I suppose we shall in time have a whole litter of his progeny at Brambleton hall. The fellow is stout and lusty, very sober and conscientious, and the wench seems to be as great an enthusiast in love as in religion. I wish you would think of employing him some other way, that the parish may not be overstocked. You know he has been bred a farrier, consequently belongs to the faculty; and as he is very docile, I make no doubt, but, with your good instruction, he may be, in a little time, qualified to act as a Welch apothecary. Tabby, who never did a favour with a good grace, has consented, with great reluctance, to this match. Perhaps it hurts her pride, as she now considers Clinker in the light of a relation; but I believe her objections are of a more selfish nature. She declares she cannot think of retaining the wife of Matthew Loyd in the character of a servant; and she foresees that on such an occasion the woman will expect some gratification for her past services. As for Clinker, exclusive of other considerations, he is so trusty, brave, affectionate, and alert, and I owe him such personal obligations, that he merits more than all the indulgence that can possibly be shewn him by Yours, Mat. Bramble. October 26. Section 81.